Zero here of the Fandom Flux crew, and this was linked to me, so, well, I blame you guys for making me realize that this thing existed. And so I decided I might as well start this and maybe turn this into a series. Today I'm going to be doing an unprofessional audiobook of Tender Wings of Desire, a Colonel Sanders novella, released for Mother's Day like 3 years ago. This is a romance novel taking place in Victorian England with Colonel Sanders. Today we'll be looking at Chapter 6, The Introduction of Harland. He was tall, dressed like a sailor with a striped linen shirt and woolen peacoat crusted with sea salt. His hair was light and fair, framing his head in airy curls, and the eyes that stared back at her were almost the exact color of the sea, perhaps darker, but not by much, and they hid behind glasses with dark frames. Madeline had never seen a sailor wear glasses before, but it somehow made him seem all the more handsome. He leaned on the bar, his eyes looking into hers and liking what he saw. This wasn't like when Carson had praised her. No, this was different, and for a moment she felt hot and cold at the same time. Madeline said. He smiled at her. "The name's Harland. What's yours?" His accent was one she had never heard before, one that I did awfully, sounding like a soft version of an American accent. "Madeline." "That is a beautiful name, That is a beautiful name, Madeline," he said. "You must be new here." Her mouth went dry as she tried desperately to figure out why this conversation was still happening. It was strange. It was not as though the other customers hadn't questioned her about her arrival. This felt different, though. This made her scramble for the proper words to say, something that would make her sound charming or clever, something that would make him want to speak to her more. You haven't really talked to him much, but you know what? Sure." She did not realize that all of her thinking and obsessing had been happening in real time, so she was mostly staring at him as she panicked, watching his face grow more and more amused. As she struggled to find words that were charming enough, finally she just gave up. "Yes," she replied, "I am new here." "Well, you certainly are a breath of fresh air." He was the most handsome person she had ever seen. Even his beard made him look more manly than unkempt. "I've never seen a sailor who wore glasses before," she said suddenly. He grinned. "Neither have I. Then again, I don't often look in the mirror," he replied. "Ah ha ha! That deserves a sensible chuckle." She felt her cheeks blush a flame red, and she retreated to the kitchen to stop them from blushing further. In the kitchen she saw the cook, a scrawny boy who barely looked old enough to shave, let alone run a kitchen. He looked up from the pot of stew he was stirring. Upon seeing Madeline, he immediately started blushing. Everybody's blushing here. "Sorry, ma'am," he said uselessly. Madeline opened her mouth, closed again, and turned to leave the kitchen. "Everything all right?" Kaime asked. "Look at the word. This is nonsense." "I'm sorry, Casey, your country is nonsense," asked as Madeline grabbed a towel and began to focus intently on wiping up a small spill of ale. "Nothing," Madeline replied absently, not even realizing that she hadn't answered the question properly. Her mind was still full of his smile, those eyes. What was wrong with her? She barely knew who he was, and there she stood, acting like a silly schoolgirl. She managed to glance at him, only to realize that he had been looking at her as well. She gave a little sigh. Com followed her line of sight and chuckled. "I see you've met Harland." Harland, yes, that is what his name had been. "Yes," Madeline said, all timid and horrible. She barely sounded like herself at this point. What was wrong with her? "Harland's a regular, goes out on the boats with the other sailors, but I think he's the only one who's really doing it for fun." This caught Madeline's attention. "What do you mean?" Chaim gave a little shrug. "There's always been something about him that implied that he was having more fun than just making ends meet. Since he's here, I thought it was just his personality. That is a gift, isn't it? To be able to treat everything like a holiday no matter what you are doing. I wish I had that." Madeline nodded, hoping that he was no longer looking at her. She snuck a little glance. He definitely still was. She looked away again. Com found all of this immensely entertaining. Isn't he a dish? I hadn't noticed, Madeline replied, not even bothering to pretend she wasn't lying. That only made Com laugh again and turn in his direction. Hey, Harland, she called over to him. Madeline was utterly mortified. Don't! She hissed at the woman she thought was going to be her bosom friend. Harlan looked over, his eyes still alluring, his smile still twinkling, and Madeline tried to keep her composure and not strangle Com where she stood. She decided that it would not be a good idea to strangle the woman who had given her a job. Madeline may not have been wise in the ways of the world, but she did know that. Yes, she did know that murder was a crime. Good job, Madeline. Come over here, Com said to Harland, causing Madeline's heart to sink to the bottom of her rib cage in mortification. Perhaps, if she were lucky, she could just melt into the floor and stop existing. And perhaps, if I were lucky, I would melt into the floor and stop existing as well, and this book would too. Even worse, Harlan stood up and walked down the bar to sit in front of them. Although Com had called him over, he only seemed to have eyes for Madeline. This made her nervous, and to combat it, she smoothed her hair down, as if that movement would chase away the fluttering she felt in her stomach. What would you like from me, Cam? He asked with his eyes sparkling. I'm just asking you to be nice to our new worker, she said with a wink. She's come a long way, dare I say. This may be her first job. Madeline wondered if it were possible to sink to the floor and disappear. You're repeating yourself. Stop it. You're repeating yourself. Stop it. Harlan leaned on the bar and looked at her with interest. Is it? How old are you, lass? I am losing this accent. I am so sorry. His accent definitely sounded too cultured for an American farmer. Oh, great book. Just call me out now. And being a sailor meant that he wasn't a member of the gentry. Did they have gentry in America? Did it matter as much here? Madeline was finally beginning to regain a little of the composure she had lost since she first laid eyes on the man. Finally, she felt some measure of who she was returning, and it gave her enough strength to look into his eyes. Old enough, she replied daringly. He laughed. A grown woman who has never worked a day in her life? You must have had quite the upbringing. Clearly I did not if I ran away from it, Madeline replied a little too easily. Immediately she regretted it. She did not want to give away her entire backstory to this near stranger, no matter how handsome he was. His smile grew slowly again, and her heart began to beat faster. Was she getting sick? It was the only explanation that made sense. Good point. I've given up on the accent now. Cam decided to take pity on poor Madeline and sent her to collect some empty tankards that had been left at various tables. Madeline gave Cam a look of pathetic thanks and went off to do her job. But as she left, she heard Harlan's slow chuckle. You better behave, Cam admonished him. On the contrary, Madeline heard Harlan reply. I think behaving is the last thing I want to do with her. In any other context, Madeline would be rightfully disgusted. Who did he think he was, saying such things about her within earshot? However, as she walked away, she could not help but feel a slow burn deep in her belly, and she wondered what it meant. I think at this point I should give a little bit of commentary and say that they are playing this. I think they're trying to play this straight, which is ridiculous. If you look at everything that's been happening so far, it's a lot of repeating and repeating and repeating and blushing and heart beating. I mean, it's very hammy, but does this even work? It doesn't work timeline-wise. I know they're trying to rebrand the Colonel as being somebody else, but it doesn't make a lick of sense when you're using his first name. I think I'm going to stop here. I cannot take the damage anymore. I don't know what this says about women in Victorian London or romance novels in general. But thank you for this experiment. I will try to do other things. If you have any recommendations for anything I should try to read next and do professionally, or unprofessionally rather, please leave it in the comments. It can be anything. It can be anything. It can be fan fiction, what have you. I'm just willing to practice my voice acting skills. See you guys next time.